we start with a very distinguished speaker, Professor B.V. Ramamurthy. He asked me to keep it brief, but I can't do that because you have done a lot and these younger kids should know that. So he's the president of Entomological Society of India, and by heart, he's a researcher like us, who loves insects and realizes their importance in our real world. And he does not need any introduction, but for the younger fellows, it's like seeing him first time. I will briefly tell about his journey. He did his bachelor's and master's from Tamil Nadu Agricultural University, Coimbatore. Following this, he had a PhD in entomology from Indian Agricultural Research Institute, New Delhi. And after completing his PhD at IARI, he moved to London for his postdoc at Natural History Museum, the CAB International Institute of Entomology. And post-returning, he served at various positions at IARI and contributed significantly in the field of entomology with 200+ publications in highly reputed journals. His work is highly cited. He has received awards and fellowships and have been part of various academic committees across country, universities, the funding agencies. The list is way longer. So I will just mention a few. A Darwin Fellow in Biosystematics, Natural History Museum, London, and a member of a DST Program Advisory Committee in Animal Sciences. He retired from IARI as a principal scientist and invited to serve as the president of Entomological Society of India. Since his induction, the society has taken various steps to bring insects back to the central discussion. And he's also serving as the chief editor of a magazine which is quite popular among insect folks in the country, Indian Entomologists. We thank Professor Ramamurthy for taking this time. I know I disturbed you a lot while scheduling this work and taking some guidance while drafting this document and all. So please.
Good morning to all of you. It's a privilege for me to be here, especially to deliberate on insects, which are the most commonly known of the biodiversity of this world. Especially, I'm delighted to deliberate about the insect decline. So Subhash has told that more than 50% of biodiversity are insects. And then there are a lot of threats to insect diversity, like there are other animals and plants. And when you want to handle such threats and catastrophes to biodiversity, especially that of insects, the insects that are attractive are being given more importance. There are also insects which are useful, like lac insect, honeybees, and many other scores of insects. So it is necessary that one should know all of them, especially their fundamentals. So when it comes to fundamentals, taxonomy is one such fundamental. Unless otherwise you know the fundamentals, you cannot handle the biodiversity, especially the decline. So my talk will be more focused towards this aspect, that how the fundamentals are important, especially the taxonomy, and also how we can place taxonomy on a dynamic and viable platform so that we will be able to handle the diversity, especially the things like threats to biodiversity like decline, also that are important in handling insects which are causing harm to human beings, especially those which are relevant to agriculture and public health. So when you want to combat any such threat, it requires that we should know the fundamentals in much more detail. And if you see retrospect what is going on fundamentals, especially of that of taxonomy, especially insect taxonomy, there is a need that we need to modulate them towards the present day requirements. And in this particular pursuit, it is also necessary that we should amalgamate the developments in other fields of science, other fields of biology like molecular biology, ecology, evolutionary biology. And unless otherwise we do this one, we cannot objectivize it towards handling the threats. Insect decline is one such threat. So my talk will be more focused towards this particular component. So initially, I will just introduce you about taxonomy. Taxonomy in its role, many people think that it is only identification. A simple job of taxonomy is to identify an organism, give a name to that organism, and then classify it. There it stops. In majority of the classical 4 taxonomy things, especially those who are specialists in a particular group of animals, they do only this. But there's a much larger thing. If you want to name an insect and identify it, the classification is very important. And if you want to do classification in terms of naturalness, it is necessary that you should imbibe what is called as systematics. Systematics is a much larger, much wider aspect of taxonomy, where we incorporate the evolution in terms of how one species is giving rise to another species, or how one group is giving rise to another group, or you do the history of these lines of evolution in terms of phylogeny. Unless otherwise you know the history of lines of evolution, how one organism is giving rise to another organism, you cannot place the classification on a natural platform. And the final objective is that the classification that you achieve should be more natural, so that it is applicable in handling the biodiversity. So if we take that way, a taxonomy has got a lot of roles. It cannot be simply a person like me who describe a new species or put the existing known species on a different classification. You need to do much more that if you want to be really serving the purpose of taxonomy towards the requirements, especially handling threats. For example, insects cause a lot of damage in agriculture, so we need to do insect pest management. It is necessary that we should do a much larger role. So it becomes necessary that a score of things are to be done in terms of the different components of taxonomy, and they all become now integral aspect of taxonomy, not like the early Linnaean time where we simply do a post-mortem analysis or an analysis and then classify it. So that way, there are a lot of characters one has to take into account at the same time. There are a lot of developments now in terms of what is called as physiology, ecology, and then knowing the morphological features in much more larger perspective, and then amalgamate them with the behavior and then the ecological features. And also now a lot of things are developing, coming in terms of what are called as now the present day trend is imbibing or integrating molecular biology into it, so that we analyze score of characters and make taxonomy much more broader, in a broader perspective, and then incorporate them in what is happening over a period of time, and also what is happening over a period of an area of space. And then not only that, we also do some kind of tritrophic relationship. An insect, when it is occurring in an ecosystem, doesn't occur alone. It occurs in score of other food chain and food web. So it is necessary that one should get into the host-plant relationship and host-animal relationship. So now is the biological sources of evidence of relationship become not only morphology, it also takes into account larger features. So now, if you want to handle taxonomy now, it is essential that you have to integrate large, different kinds of multidisciplinary things. So many people say that molecular biology is not part of taxonomy. It is not so. Now, many people will say that physiology is not taxonomy. Many people will say that the genetics is not taxonomy, as being practiced by the traditional taxonomists. But now, the scenario is changing. One has to be much more broad-based. One has to take that taxonomy should be a holistic one, and then it should be much more broad-based. So if you see what is happening over a period of time in terms of what is being used in taxonomy, things are getting changed. It is not the same as what was there during the Linnaean time in terms of hierarchical classification. A lot of things have come into the broader aspects of taxonomy. And one of the things which you have to notice here is, it is not that it is only isolated, it is an additive. We keep on adding score of characters to a particular organism in terms of its fundamentals and make its fundamentals much more stronger so that you can use them towards exploiting the biodiversity. So that way, if you see, I will just get into how do we, or what we do in a conventional taxonomy. In a conventional taxonomy, we simply see into some of the restricted features only. And there is a need that we should do an introspection. And I will do this with some of my own examples of work done by me. I started my career in 1976. And then during that time, what was being done by a taxonomist was only do a postmortem analysis, but do a postmortem analysis in terms of what is happening to the morphology in its different perspectives. Maximum, we try to add more characters. And for example, if this was not used in this particular group, we started using it. And then we got into some of the aspects of internal anatomy, which are much more relevant and much more, much more logical in handling the group of animals. So that is what we used to do in a classical taxonomy. In a routine taxonomy, we simply do only a post-mortem analysis. That was the normal trend with many of the taxonomists. So what we used to do is, an insect is known by not only its adult, but also its immature stages. So we should get into the different features which are specific for a particular group of animals in terms of taxonomy, and then we get into the morphology, and then we do it. That is what we normally do in a routine taxonomy. And we hardly scratch the surface of how the organism is occurring in nature. For example, in case of many insects, they occur in terms of its immature stages. They also occur in terms of variation in the geographical distribution. Many times these are being ignored. Only in few organisms they touch, in few insects they are being touched. But we need to get into these if you want to handle threats like insect decline. So I will give you some examples where we have not only touched upon the morphology, but also touched upon in terms of behavioral ecology. There are some insects where the sound production is an important feature. For example, a family of beetle, we call them as weevil. They are all known for sound production. And this sound production is done for various reasons, various life history purposes like mating isolation, and also in getting the sex aggregation or other kind of thing. And this sound production is characterized by some morphological features. And these morphological features occur in the different parts of the body of the insect. And these were not at all used earlier. And with the result that the classification was not at all natural. There were many insects put in the same subfamily of Cryptorhynchinae, which were not at all producing sound. So now it is not at all logical to put those insects which are producing sound with those insects which are not producing sound. Naturally, they are not a cohesive unit. The purpose here is to achieve what is called as monophily. So now there are developments coming, and these developments are very important in the case of those insects which are producing what are called as intraspecific populations in the form of what are called as biotypes or races. And then when you are, for example, when we develop a resistant variety in rice, what happens is the same insect which is feeding on rice is able to evolve itself in terms of different biotypes, and then it is able to come over the resistant variety. So it is able to overcome the host plant resistance which you are developing, and there's an evolution taking place. And this evolution is also in tune with what is called as reproductive isolation. The reproductive isolation in this group of insects is taking place by the calling sound. So now, if they are able to evolve in terms of different calling sound without any variation, any morphological differences, then they become sibling species and they become reproductively isolated. So there it creates a lot of problems. So it is necessary that one should get into various features like that. So, and it is not only the ecology and field biology very important. There is an element of chemistry also is coming. For example, there are a number of hydrocarbons which are there in insects, which are of importance in the chemical ecology. For example, those of you who know about the pheromones, they are all based on what is called as chemical ecology. So unless otherwise we know, we get into the, because we found in the field that many of the insects are behaving differently with respect to a pheromone that has been developed for the particular insect. That is happening because of the variations in the hydrocarbons. So now we need to use them also in terms of the requirement for a modified taxonomy. So that taxonomy provides what is called, it becomes functional in terms of what is required on the field situation in handling some of the threats. And the same thing holds good when you want to do elaborate studies on the field biology. Many of the fundamentals with respect to field biology and ecology are being brought out by the institutions like Ahmedabad University, who are concentrating on fundamentals, or Indian Institute of Science, or ISER. Whereas those who are working in agriculture university, they do not bother at all, because their purpose is to see the ultimate aim of how to manage an insect. But when you manage an insect, what happens is they behave differently in the field situation. For example, same species is able to produce a different kind of population, which is reproductively much more potent. So it becomes an OR strategies. What I mean by OR strategies, it becomes biologically much more successful. So it is able to withstand the adverse condition, and then it is able to invade another area and then cause damages there. And this is an example. It may not be directly insect decline, but it may be of use in deciphering the taxonomy of insects that are relevant to agriculture. So it becomes necessary that you cannot simply stop with morphology. You cannot stop with post-mortem analysis. You need to get into the populations as they are occurring in the field, and then see how they are behaving with respect to the reproductive potential and environmental resistance, which is leading to what is called a biotic balance. So it becomes essential that the taxonomy has to transform itself. It has to be dynamic in dealing with the organism as they are occurring in the field. And this is very important when you want to do an analysis of what is called as adaptive radiation, which is relevant to classification. When you are dealing with large groups of organisms, they always radiate in terms of their, and this happens in the case of insects, those herbivorous insects, happens because of the relationship with the host plant. So when there is a radiation taking place because of tritrophic relationships, when they are occurring, especially with respect to host plant relationship, and they develop into another, or they group themselves into another kind of organism. So this is very much important. So those of you who are botanists should know that there are a lot of implications for the insects as they are occurring as a herbivorous insect. It is essential that one has to get into the host plant relationship and then deal with them in a platform which is together. So far I have told you about the routine taxonomy, how it is being practiced, and then how we need to change it towards, and also I gave you some examples, some isolated examples where some of the things have been done in a manner which will place taxonomy on a strong and viable platform. Now I will use some of the examples from my own work, how modulations are critical in dealing with taxonomy, and then they are also essential. Unless otherwise you modulate taxonomy as per the present day requirement, it is very difficult to use it for what you call when you want to a specific purpose. For example, insect decline is our target, then it becomes essential that you have to modulate the fundamentals, including taxonomy, in a manner that is required. So I will give you an example here of two insects which are useful. One is an useful insect. Lac insect is the one which is useful for industrial importance. It is much more much more common as a commercial thing in the tribal areas of Jharkhand and nearby places. And it has got a lot of applied value because the lac insect produces some of the chemicals which cannot be synthesized. So now there are these lac insects was being researched by the formerly known as Indian Lac Research Institute. Now it is known as Indian Institute for Natural Resins and Gums, where they were maintaining 42 lac insect lines. And these 42 lac insect lines were not at all studied for the fundamentals. They were known only for their applied value, only for their occurrence in different, tribal areas and forest areas of Jharkhand and nearby places. So there was a lot of problem in handling these 42 lac insect lines towards their applied value, towards their, for example, if you want to produce a lac of higher quality, which is of required quality, it becomes essential that you should characterize these 42 lac insect lines and then come out with those lines which are of relevance. But unless otherwise you understand their systematics, it is not possible for you to identify them because they were simply being cultured and kept in the form of insect lines. So there was a requirement by the government of India. So we got into, though I am not a specialist in this particular group, being a taxonomist, I was asked to handle this problem. And then what was the requirement was to deviate from the normal practice. What I mean by deviate from normal practice is try to incorporate large number of characters, try to put many angles to understanding the lac insect in terms of their chemistry of the lac constituents, their insect-host-plant relationship, how they are being cultured in the, and also when we are doing insect-host interaction, it becomes necessary that there are a lot of endosymbionts which are responsible for lac production, and then the biochemical characters become very important. And then being a taxonomist, the taxonomy, which is using the the traditional stages like the female, but also to handle the other life cycle stages. And then the being 42 lac insect lines, there are a lot of characters in terms of taxonomy, in terms of their ecology. So we need to digitize them together and then go for a statistical analysis, which was lacking. And then here also we used, Saroja will be dealing in detail later, where the molecular approaches gave us a lot of leads into how to characterize these 42 lac insect lines. The result was describing new species, taking into account the novel features like the physiology, the host-plant relationship, and then hitherto there was only morphology which was being utilized in deciphering and delineating species. We got into the other aspects, and then there was an amalgamated approach. There was a holistic approach in handling many characters together, and then it was also validated through statistical analysis so that we can not only know them by what is called as the traditional morphological characters, but also infusing some kind of validation into how these insects get grouped. And then there was a reverse taxonomy done here by after doing statistical studies by overlapping, by superimposing the taxonomic characters with other characters, we evolved a new classification. And then the 42 lac insect lines were placed on a scientific basis into groups of lac insect lines. We also named a few of these groups because they were not known earlier. And then in doing this, some of the basic features, like because lac insect produces lac by feeding on a particular plant. So we went into the physiology, the feeding physiology of these lac insect lines. And then there are a lot of variation. There was a one-to-one interaction with the host plant on which the lac insect lines were occurring. They were not on a single host plant. They were on more than one host plant. So we could get into the physiological features and also internal anatomy and morphological features of the feeding organism. And there was we adopted a holistic approach by placing taxonomy on a viable platform. This is what we did with these lac insect lines. And then we did a lot of studies on the ecology, their behavior, and then we put all of them together along with the molecular information and also organic chemistry in terms of those which are producing the what you call the alluritic acid, which is the major component in the lac product. And then we could bring out what you call a scheme which could be utilized by lac production, commercial production industry, so that we could identify those lac insect lines which are much more of commercial value. So there was a basic of fundamental studies which went into the requirement of the lac commercial industry in dealing with the lac insect. So this is what we did with and where we did a lot of studies by incorporating large number of characters, including the molecular characters, so that what we are coming out is a foolproof system where it is based on a broad-based classification rather than an isolated, restricted classification. And this revolutionized the taxonomy of lac insect line and towards the and use them towards the utilitarian aspect like commercial lac production. So such a kind of study, maybe this may not be relevant directly to insect decline, especially if you want to get into the insect decline, and which is the subject area of today's workshop. I feel that there's a need to place taxonomy on a viable platform like this one. Then only we will be able to cater to the requirements of insect decline. Now I am coming to an example of harmful insect, which is many of you will be knowing about the whitefly, which is creating problem not only as a pest but also as a vector of many virus diseases. And the whitefly is known as Bemisia tabaci. And earlier they used to say that it is a species complex, but now it is not. Now the results and the interpretations that are coming out say that it's a complex species. It means they need not be given different species names, but they are genetic groups of the same species which have got a different kind of behavior. And here again we did a reverse taxonomy here. We identified them by utilizing molecular tools in terms of genetic group, which is the universally known phenomena of dividing the Bemisia tabaci into genetic groups by utilizing the molecular markers. Then after doing this, we went into the biology of this in the laboratory and in the greenhouse, and we tried to see whether we can see any morphological differences. And the scanning microscopy came to our rescue, and after studying the biology in the field in different host plants and maintaining them on the same host plant in a natural condition, we could see the variation that was taking place in the developmental stages. And then we also got into a new definition for the characterization of genetic group. Otherwise, they were all known only by molecular differences. And then we do a reverse taxonomy here. And then in doing so, we analyze the samples of this insect from throughout India in terms of its geographical distribution. And then we studied their what you call bacterial endosymbionts, because when this particular insect is known as a vector of deadly plant diseases, it is all linked with the presence of endosymbionts in their what you call in their anatomy and physiology, which play a lot of role in the characterization of different genetic groups. When we divide them molecular wise into different genetic groups, and then we divide them in terms of what is called as the differences in terms of morphology, what we find is there is a need to get into more molecular markers, and then there's a need for validation of them, and then couple them with, if you see this particular insect is becoming more serious because of its what you call insecticide resistance. Some of the genetic groups are known for their resistance to the commonly used insecticides. So we went into the basis of insect physiology in terms of their enzyme variations, and then we could decipher the insecticide resistance spectrum in the different genetic groups, and then so that we can know what are those genetic groups which are known for their virulliferous nature, and then which are known for breaking down the host plant resistance, and then becoming much more serious, and then becoming epidemic in a particular locality. So here we did a holistic approach in doing that particular, in handling this particular insect. What we could develop was a validated system of identifying the genetic groups in terms of not only morphology, but also a series of features, including insect resistance and host-plant interactions. And when you want to deal with catastrophe like insect pest management, it becomes essential that we need to know the taxonomy in much more serious nature. And then, especially when you are dealing with pests which are of complex nature, which are producing the intraspecific population, which are producing biotypes, and then sometimes, especially in the case of public health importance like mosquitoes, it is quite common that they develop into different kinds of races and strains. It becomes essential that you need to get into the what is called as answering questions like what is it, what is the native home and distribution, biological features, and all of these questions are answered very well if you are able to place taxonomy on a viable platform. And I am sure that the catastrophe like insect decline can also be answered by getting into placing taxonomy on a viable platform. And here I am giving an example where classification is playing a greater role. For example, these both belong to the same group of beetles called weevils. Some of them are short snout, some of them are long snout. So when we are having short snout weevils, and then they are characterized in terms of morphology, you can know very well that they cannot place their eggs. They can place their eggs only on surface, whereas those which are having a longer snout, they can dig deeper into the plant tissue and plant their eggs on a deeper tissue. Now, these are of relevance in terms of pest management. So when you want to deal with this insect and it is becoming a pest, it becomes essential that classification should give you host of evolutionary features and their behavior. And once you know their behavior and their what you call their ecology, then the insect pest management becomes much more easy because you can target the vulnerability in their life cycle stages, and then you can go on be successful in dealing with those. So it becomes essential that we need to deal with biodiversity not on a single platform in terms of species diversity. You need to go much more deeper into the genetic diversity and see what is happening in terms of their ecological diversity. Unless otherwise, taxonomy places itself away from not only species diversity, but also in terms of much more deeper dimensions in terms of genetic diversity, for example, molecular diversity, and also in much more larger angle in terms of ecological diversity. Your dealing with them is not going to be easy. So it becomes essential that taxonomy has to change and it has to become viable, it has to become functional, it has to become multidimensional. Then only it will be able to serve the requirements of the present day handling of biodiversity. Thank you.